You're listening to the Book Talk Today podcast, a podcast that inspires readers to obtain valuable insights to inform, educate, and improve lives. My name is Abdi. I'm an avid reader, best known for the creation of the 1 Minute Book Review community, and I'm sitting down with authors to delve deeper into the books they have written to uncover the story behind the story. Hello Book Talk Today family, and welcome back to another episode of the Book Talk Today podcast. My name is Orn, I am your host, and in today's episode we have a very special one for you. Being that it's the end of 2021, I thought it would be apt to do a best of 2021 episode where we go back and have a look at some of my favorite clips from the last year of the podcast and talk about why I think these clips are so great and some of the learnings that I took from it. So in this episode, we'll be walking through 10 of my favorite clips from the podcast from 2021 and giving you some of my takes on why I think they are such great clips. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the podcast, whether you're listening to this on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you're listening to this. Please do subscribe and share with any friends or family that you think would love listening to me interviewing authors and talking about their amazing books as well. So before we get into it, I just want to say thank you so much for everyone for tuning in for the last year. The podcast has grown massively all over the world over the past year, and I'm so grateful for all of you listening in and sharing it with all of the people that you know. So thank you so much for tuning in for the past year, and I can't wait for 2022 as well. So our first clip from today is from episode 28 that we did with Nick Velasquez to discuss his book, Learn, Improve, Master. This is the second time that Nick came on the podcast. And if you've listened to the podcast or both with Nick, you'll know that we both love to read. We are both voracious readers. And in our conversations, we discuss books that we love, but also the process of reading. And one of the clips that I chose from the second conversation that we had was this idea of the finity that we have, or the finitude in terms of reading. There are thousands and thousands of books out there, and we only have a finite amount of time. And it's really difficult sometimes to choose the right amount of books to read. And we can often feel overwhelmed and paralyzed by the amount of books out there and actually choosing them. So in the conversation, we discuss this idea that overreading, the idea that sometimes we can just read and read and read, and we don't have enough time to actually apply the things that we're learning in our life. So here's the clip.
Thinking about it in the sense of I only have a limited amount of books that I can read in my life is making me more conscious of what do I want to read. Yeah. So there is this awesome thing that I read from Warren Buffett, the famous investor, and he was giving a lecture, might have been at Harvard. And he said, if you want to be a better investor, just imagine this. Imagine that I give you a coupon that it has like 7 places where you can punch a hole. Okay. So once you're done, once you punch all the 7 holes, and that's it. Now imagine that's the investments you can make in your life. You only get to do 7. How careful would you be about every investment you make? Really damn careful. So many times I buy books thinking that I'll just have my entire life and it will all be good. And maybe last year when I was looking at bookshelves, it's like, I won't get to read all this. It's just not going to happen. I started doing just basic math. And I said, my life is not going to be enough. And what's the point? Like, what's the point if I read all this until I'm 70? And then I'm saying like, okay, I'm ready to leave now. Like, no, man, it's over.
Well, it's not over, but it's just.
But it's like many things will be over.
Yeah.
Like many things that wouldn't
opportunities will be open.
Yes.
Will be over. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, what is the right balance of what I read, what I apply, and just realizing that I need to just choose very carefully and reduce and be okay that I won't get to do it all. And that makes it even more special because the things I do get to do, those are the ones that I put more value on. So again, too many options dilute purpose. But if you start restricting yourself, now you find a true value.
One of the quotes that really stood out to me that Nick said towards the end of the clip was that too many options dilute purpose. And that's so true. There is such a thing as the paradox of choice. There's so much choice out there that we can often feel overwhelmed, and that deludes our actual purpose in life. So if you ever get into the situation, take comfort in knowing that you can't read every book that is out there. And to achieve everything you want, focus on the ones that are valuable to you at any one time. So if you're going out there and looking to involve yourself or improve in one skill or learn something specifically, then absorb yourself in that one thing for that specific period of time and then move on to something else. Don't feel like you have to read everything all at one time, because you'll end up not making any progress on anything. So take that advice and find the balance between reading and application. It's a difficulty that I think everyone has, but I think for readers in particular, it's something that we all struggle with. So take Nick's advice on, and hopefully you'll make some inroads. The second clip I've chosen from today is from episode 34, where we discussed the book The Social Instinct, How Cooperation Shaped the World, with Nichola Raihani. And this idea of cooperation is an interesting one. We feel as if we're living in an ever-divided world, but from biology, and she's an evolutionary biologist, she talks about this idea that cooperation shaped the world. She analyzes different animals in different kingdoms and showed how cooperation often determines how best they get on. In this clip, we discussed the distribution of the vaccine, but also climate change, and how appreciating our independence and actually understand how interdependent we all are of one another, regardless of the country that we reside in, is really important to tackle some of these public good issues, whether it be climate change, whether it be deforestation, whether it be, for instance, global poverty. These big ideas and these big problems are something that appreciating our interdependence would mean that we can actually make some inroads to solving them. So here's a clip.
I actually think like one of the biggest threats that we face, or one of our biggest collective challenges, is that we often fail to recognize that we are interdependent when we are interdependent. And so the COVID is like a really good example of that, where, you know, with this, if on this question of how vaccines ought to be distributed globally versus kept parochially within the country, I think there is a real failure to realize the extent to which we actually are all really interdependent in this situation, and that the success of no country can have an individual success. If every country hasn't somehow got this under control, then no country is going to get it under control. Yeah. And I think the same goes for, like you said, with climate change, that we really are fundamentally interdependent here. And if we can't recognize that, then that is a huge obstacle to being able to tackle these global public goods problems.
Having studied politics at university and reading about history extensively, it's very easy to get into this tribal way of thinking that in the past we were at war with one another and it's one country versus another country. But I think as we go into the future, I think there's going to be a more collectivist attitude. This idea that regardless of country, regardless of culture, regardless of religion or any sectarian divide, there's going to be a collectivist attitude. And I don't think this is a choice. I think this is something that we have to do in order to tackle some of the problems that we're going to come up against. I think seeing the world as a whole is something that is a fairly new phenomena, but I think it's something that we must do in order to tackle a lot of these issues. And I think in the book and in this clip, we discussed this idea of interdependence. And I think this idea is going to be very prevalent in the next 100 to 200 years, whether we be a space-faring race or in our tackle for climate change and other of these big issues, whether they be global poverty or insert any global issue that we're all going through. I think understanding that we're all in it together is a massive step in order to actually tackle some of these issues. And that's the reason why I put this clip in, because I think appreciating this interdependence is something that is really important, and is why I put it in. Our third clip in the best of 2021 was from episode 36, where we were joined by Scott Young to discuss his book, Ultra Learning, Accelerate Your Career, Master Hard Skills, and Outsmart the Competition. And I have a curiosity for learning new skills. I think if anyone knows me very well, or if you follow my content, I'm very curious about a range of different things. And one thing that stood out to me in this conversation where we were talking about how to become an ultra learner was this idea that remembering is a skill. we don't often see remembering as a skill. It's something that we have to do in order to learn a new skill or to study for an exam or to just do anything. We need to remember, but it's something that needs to be trained. And in the book, he talks about active recall, which is a technique that I use in my note-taking method, and I've learned how to program over the last 6 months, and I've been using this technique of active recall, which is essentially reading a piece of information, having a prompt, and then trying to retrieve that information based on that prompt, not looking back at your notes. And I think seeing remembering as a skill is something that is overlooked and something that Scott talks about in this clip.
People don't realize that's everyone. Like, everyone reads books and remembers like vanishingly small amounts of what was in the book. Like, everyone watches a lecture and like can recall, just the gist of like small parts of it. I don't want to say that this means that reading books and watching lectures is useless. I think they serve an important function, but I think I feel like useful knowledge is much closer to a skill that requires practice than I think people often give credit for. That I watched this and I remembered it, I think is valuable, but particularly for things where you are, going to need to use this in some place, this idea of practicing. And so I think the recall idea that remembering is a skill, right? That we don't often think of remembering as a skill, but like remembering something specific given a particular prompt is a skill that requires practice the way that riding a bicycle requires practice, I think is an underappreciated point.
As you've seen from that clip, Scott says that remembering as a skill is something that's often overlooked. And if you're someone who really struggles to remember things, then I think seeing remembering as a skill is something that you can utilize and use the technique of active recall to actually help improve your recall of specific information, but also to help with certain skills. Like, for instance, if you want to learn how to play the guitar and you want to learn, for instance, the minor pentatonic scale on the guitar, then actually use that as a skill that you're trying to learn. And, remember that it goes, for instance, like 1 4 1 3 1 3 1 4 1 4 as you go down the scale, and that is going to help you to become better. And I think that can be translated into any skill that you want to do. So if you're someone that is looking to learn more and remember more, start using active recall as a skill and implement it as a skill that you're looking to master. The fourth clip from the best of 2021 was actually from one of my favorite books of the year, The Map of Knowledge. And on episode 37, we were joined by Violet to discuss her book. And in an ever-growing ideological world, we are building walls around one another. And earlier we discussed this idea of interdependence. And this is why I like books, is even though they're not in the same field, you can also see themes and patterns emerging between them. And in this clip, she really was quite passionate, and especially her purpose and mission of writing this book was to share the shared culture and heritage that dates back 1500 years that we all have. And this idea that if we want to progress and move forward, we need to understand that we have a shared heritage and culture that dates back a long way. So here's the clip.
I just, want to contribute in a very small way to making people aware of the truth of our cultural heritage and the breadth of it. And I don't know, it sounds corny, but I do feel that, some of the problems that society has today with, people accepting people who are different. I think if we all had a clearer idea, and I mean, Muslims, Christians, everyone, if we all had a clearer idea of our shared heritage, then perhaps it would be easier not to feel so distant and so other from one another. I don't know. That's maybe a bit of a grandiose aim to have.
But it's an important one. And I think that is the great thing about the book, because I think if anyone does have any cultural or religious bias, I think it's hard to refute the fact that at times when information was spread the most, it was when we got along the best. Yeah. Which is, I think, is a lesson for us all.
And I guess if I could sort of force people to read it, the people I would be forcing would be, Christian extremists and Muslim extremists. I think those two groups, if they could all have a copy and read it, maybe it would
trying to
open their
convince them
minds
to read anything that's outside of their their area is very difficult anyway, Violet. So that might be a difficult task.
Yeah, but you can dream.
Yeah, always dream. Violet's mission is a very interesting one for me, because it really made me think, because it's often those that need knowledge the most that are those that are least likely to pursue it. And, you know, towards the end, she was saying how she wants, you know, Muslim extremists or Christian extremists to read the book. But it's often those people that are least likely to read these books, and is why they are in their own chasm and in their own vacuum of ideas. And I almost think that this is a wider issue with whether it be the internet or social media or just pockets of information that seem to fester and mold and get rancid, because the individuals inside them don't open themselves up to the ideas that are outside their own way of thinking. And that's why I think it's really important to read, obviously. I think if anyone knows me, they would know my passion for reading and sharing knowledge, but it's also to understand and appreciate that we all have a shared history and a shared culture and a shared history with one another. And I think the more that we break down these barriers, the more that we see that we are all sort of the same type. We share the same history as one another. I think the more that we can progress and move forward. So one of my favorite books of the year, on my personal YouTube channel, I'll be talking about this book in a bit more depth when I do my favorite books of 2021. But this was a really favorite book of mine, definitely for the year. And in the clip you just watched, you can definitely see the passion that Violet talks about, you know, sharing this idea of our shared heritage and shared culture. For our fifth clip, we go to episode 41 with Tom Rivett-Carnac to discuss his book, The Future We Choose, A Stubborn Optimist's Guide to the Climate Crisis, or to Climate Change. And climate change is a divisive topic. You either stand on the side of the people who think we need to act straight away, those who feel like we need to take a more slow approach, or even those who don't believe it's a thing. So it's a very divisive topic, and in our conversation we discussed how we can get out of this mired way of thinking about climate change, or a very depressive state that many people get into in reference to climate change, and how we can become a stubborn optimist, someone who is fixated on making change today but is optimistic about the future. And Tom, in this clip, gave a very rousing speech. I felt it to be very Winston Churchill-esque. It's very similar to his D-Day speech. We will fight them on the beaches kind of speech. If you don't know that speech by Winston Churchill, I definitely recommend having a listen to it. I think you can get the audio for it, or even read it online. But yeah, here's the clip.
About meeting this moment, about doing what you can, how you can be part of this great shared endeavour to both help people understand how they can participate, but also to help people to realise that it is a great shared endeavour. I mean, where we are right now has all the makings of the most remarkable adventure story, right? I mean, impossible odds, a late hour, disaster if we fail, a new world if we succeed. We should meet this with some of that energy and some of that determination as well. This is a moment that will be looked at and remembered for many, many generations. And the future it will be remembered from is very much in our hands right now. So we need to be aware of that every day, the responsibility of being alive today. And doing that changes how we feel about it and gets us out of our sense of apathy and torpor and depression, and focuses us on what can be done now and only now in order to create that future. And that is just the most remarkable way to live your life.
Anyone else feel like selling their car and starting a green revolution? No, I'm just joking. But there were some really great points raised by Tom during this clip, and also during our conversation. And I do believe each one of us can play an individual role in respect to climate change. However, I do think more needs to be done for governments in order to make a bigger impact in relation to climate change. I think it's great to encourage people to go zero waste, or even to reduce their meat consumption, as meat is a big contributing factor to deforestation and also to methane production. But I do think that more larger corporations can do more. You and I can make changes to our daily lives, but if a large conglomerate is still producing large amounts of CO2, it's going to negate probably millions or perhaps even billions of net change for each individual. So it was an interesting conversation about the dynamic between governmental change and individual change, and what it may mean for the future of climate change.
For our sixth clip, we go to episode 43, where we were joined by Will Storr to discuss his most recent book, The Status Game. And Will Storr remains one of my personal favourite authors. His books, The Science of Storytelling, which he came on last year to discuss on the podcast, as well as his book Selfie, are among one of my favourites books, and he remains one of my favourite authors. So it was a real pleasure to have him back on the podcast. That's the great thing about this podcast, is just reaching out to your favourite authors and getting them on and having a conversation. I still can't believe that's even a thing, but anyway, Will remains one of my favourite authors, like I said, and in this book he gives an analysis of how status determines the society in which we live in. And in this clip, he says how each one of us can run away with our own moral status. We can spend so much time judging others in relation to our own moral status, and this can be detrimental, especially if we're constantly judging others, whether it's on social media or within our own cliques or in our own groups, and we avoid our own moral actions. Here's the clip.
We're very good at fooling ourselves about how morally good we and the people who are playing a game with are compared to other people. And I think that we can really run away with that, especially in the age of social media, where it's so easily to earn status by attacking rivals and boasting about ourselves. So I just think it's about being careful about morality, and the way I kind of write about it in the book is to kind of reduce your moral sphere. You know, like how much are you spending your time in your head or with other people morally judging other people versus how much are you thinking about yourself and am I doing it? You know, am I being the best me morally? And it's just about working that ratio, I think. So you're thinking more about your own moral worth and less about that of other people, because it's so easy today, especially on the internet, to get some cheap status by attacking people and putting people down.
One of the main things I took from our conversation was focusing on individual responsibility in terms of our own morality. Individual responsibility is often overlooked in favour of judgment of others, but I think this is wrong. And to play the status game correctly, you have to first see the flaws in yourself before you see the flaws in others. I know Jordan Peterson talks about that in his book 12 Rules for Life, where he says, you know, take care of your own home before you judge the world. And Confucius has a saying as well, don't judge the snow on your neighbor's roof when your porch is dirty, or something along those lines. And that is a very ancient sort of philosophy, this idea of not judging others before fixing yourself. And I think taking individual responsibility for yourself and for your own development and growth should be your primary concern before judging others. And in fact, even if you take that road, you will be so preoccupied with yourself and seeing the flaws in yourself that you won't actually have the time and attention to be judging others. And I think this is the idea to have a good relationship with status, is to play multiple games of status. And that was something that we picked up in the conversation as well. It wasn't in that clip specifically, but it was something that was sort of a tether to the end of that point, which is this idea that many people force themselves to play only one game in life. And when you do that, what tends to happen is you tend to get so ingrained in that one game. You tend to fixate your identity in that one game, and that's where things can start to go a bit awry. So if you're someone that finds himself just focusing on one game and judging others within that game, or even judging people outside of that game, is focus on many different games, you know, whether you're have athletic pursuits, creative pursuits, you know, professional pursuits, career, relationship pursuits, whatever that might be, you know, live in different domains in life. And that way you can, you know, broaden your circle, broaden the relationships you have, and meet a more diverse set of people. And that way you can play different status games and avoid the trap of falling into one game. And that was a great sort of lesson I took from the book, but also from the conversation as well, which Will touches upon towards the end. For our seventh clip, we were joined on the podcast again by Andrew Graham-Dixon, who is the author of the book Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel. Andrew came on the podcast late last year, around this time, to discuss Michelangelo di Caravaggio, not Michelangelo. Sistine Chapel, but Michelangelo de Caravaggio, and that was actually our most popular podcast to date. On YouTube, I think it has over 11,000 views, which is really, really crazy. I never thought it would be that popular, but I'm a massive fan of Caravaggio, and I'm also a massive fan of Andrew's work as well, so it was pretty much a no-brainer to have him back on the podcast to discuss Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel. I personally had the pleasure of visiting the Sistine Chapel in 2006 when my family and I visited Rome, and the experience stuck with me to this day. The fact that one man could imagine such a painting, but also then go and create it, and he wasn't even known for his fresco painting. You know, if anyone knows Michelangelo, he was a sculptor by his profession, by his trade. But the fact that he can take the 3D elements of sculpture and paint that in Italian fresco is mind-blowing to me. And in this one clip summarizes the divine nature of Michelangelo's work. I think in the book, and also from the conversation that Andrew and I have, we really try to delve deeply into the asceticism of Michelangelo and how he tried to connect to God through his art, and how he wanted to express divinity through his own art. And in this clip, Andrew talks about the Sistine Chapel as an exercise in getting closer to God and to the divine.
And I think that Michelangelo perhaps saw himself as somebody, you know, in this end time, rather as Noah was in his own end time. So Noah's Ark becomes the Sistine Chapel, which is Michelangelo's Ark. And there he is right at the top of the boat that is the chapel, painting to God, painting for God, painting the message of God, painting enlightenment, so that, you know, when it comes to the final contest between good and evil, people will come to the Sistine Chapel and they will see and they will believe, and, you know, the new heaven and the new heaven on earth that's predicted in the book of Revelations will come to pass, and Michelangelo's all part of that. I don't think it's you know, you have to understand that people have a very, very different mindset to ours in that time, and I think that's part of it. He feels very, very close to God, and he writes poems about. He's one of, as well as, you know, again, we were talking earlier about how he could just sort of be something outside his speciality. He's not even a painter, but he paints the Sistine Chapel. He's not even a poet, but his modern reputation in Italian literary circles is as the greatest poet of the Italian 16th century. So, you know, but he writes these poems about his devotion to God, sonnets, a lot of them. So I think that's very much part of it, and it's very important to him that he wants to depict God as the very last thing that he does.
I think the thing that stood out to me most in particular from this clip is not only the true artistic talent that Michelangelo had, which he had in abundance, but that this artistic pursuit had a meaning. You know, the meaning was to achieve closeness to God and to create a piece of divine representation on earth. And I think it's something that is lost in today's society. We almost think that creativity needs to be made for attention or even for some short-term monetary gain. But I think back then, and particularly with Michelangelo, especially around that time, I think everyone had a more closer connection to the divine, and their art, or the way that they expressed themselves, was to find connection to God and through the and divine nature. And it's an idea that has stuck with me ever since speaking with Andrew, but also since visiting the Sistine Chapel and reading the book and hearing Andrew talk about it, and made me think about it a bit more. And I'll continue to think about it for some time. Our 8th clip comes from episode 49, where we were joined by Donald Robertson to discuss his book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. And I've been following Stoicism for the past couple of years, namely Ryan Holiday's work. So when I saw the book by Donald I think it came up on my Amazon feed or something, I read the book and invited him on the podcast. And we had a great conversation regarding the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism in general, and the relationship between Stoicism and modern day cognitive behavioral therapy, and how using Stoicism as a therapeutic method or a therapy for people who are going through, whether it be anxiety or depression, rather than just seeing it as an old philosophy that, you know, no one can touch because it's ancient, is bringing it into modernity and showing how you can actually use the practices to make your life better. But in this particular clip, Donald discusses how this idea that's based on the story of Zeno about taking on the color of dead men, which is this idea that we should all be learning from people who have come before us. I think many of us look at people in the present and want to learn from them, but I think we are doing ourselves a disservice from the people who have come before us. So here's the clip.
There are many metaphors that run through Stoicism that are kind of cool, and one of them is that Zeno was a dye merchant. The Phoenician people traded this purple dye called Tyrian or imperial purple. It came from the murex sea snail. So they would gather laboriously thousands of these sea snails and extract them and ferment them, and then they'd had to pick out this gland that they got the purple. It was the most disgusting job in history. Like, it was horrible. It must have stank to high heaven, and it took ages to get a small quantity of this stuff, but it was worth an absolute fortune. And Zeno was travelling with a load of it. He was quite wealthy from doing this, and his ship sank, and it all just dissolved back into the sea. So this thing that took ages then just dissolved back where it originally came from. It went back to where it came from, and it was gone. Like, there's no getting it back. There's no salvaging that. And so he ended up at Athens, and he said his most profitable journey ever was the one where he lost all of his cargo, because that was what inspired him to have a kind of midlife crisis and start again from scratch and reinvent himself as a philosopher. It's like the best thing that ever happened to me was going bankrupt. Like, you know, it's a strange thing. You kind of hear people saying that today. You know, like, the best thing ever happened to me was losing my job. Like, and he's like one of the first people in history to kind of come out with that. And then he went to the Oracle at Delphi, which is like, it's over that way. It's just like, you know, a few miles, like, it's just outside Athens. Yeah. And the Oracle said, yeah, you should take on the colour of dead men. And he thought, well, that's just typical. Like, this woman, the Pythia, like, just comes out with these really cryptic remarks. Like, that's no use to man nor beast. You know, what am I supposed to make of that? And he went away and he had to think about it. And he thought, well, what she means is that instead of dyeing clothes with the colour of dead shellfish, like, for a living, like, you've got to make a living somehow, but, you know, like, instead of doing that, like, it's pointless, really. It's a complete vanity thing, right? But instead of doing that, what I should be doing is dyeing my character, dyeing my mind with the wisdom of dead men or dead philosophers from previous generations.
There is this common desire to want to be someone that you admire, whether it is their talent, their looks, or even their money. But what I like about this phrase of taking on the colour of dead men is that you should focus on learning from others instead of wanting to be others. We are all individuals on a singular path, none like us before and none like us after. Therefore, instead of wanting to be another person, we should aim to learn from those who were or are the wisest among us, with the aim of becoming the best versions of ourselves. And as someone who loves to read and learn the ideas of taking on the colour of dead men, this phrase appeals to me greatly, and I believe is one that many more people should follow. And I think this idea of taking on the colour of dead men is one that more people need to do, and one that I really focus on a lot, because I think that the ideas and books that have stood the test of time and that have been around for thousands of years are tested by time. I think sometimes we think that the new ideas are the ones that are the best, but often it's usually the ones that have been around for hundreds or even thousands of years are often seen to be more true, because they have filtered through time and the ideas have been tested and they have been carried through the generations. And I think more people need to look back into history to see that, in order to confirm that and find more value. Our 9th clip comes from episode 50 with Oliver Burkeman, where we discussed his book 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I don't have the book on me because I gave it to a friend. And I truly believe that productivity advice is generally flawed to a degree. It asks each one of us to optimize each minute by planning each minute instead of actually focusing on optimizing that minute. It's so much focus on the planning element that goes into doing more rather than focusing on the results at the back end. And it also teaches us to believe that we can do it all, which is a fallacy. That is quickly made true in practice. If you're someone who has time blocked or someone who has overloaded their schedule, you'll quickly realize that you can't do everything. And it's often deciding what to fail at in advance, as Oliver explains.
Deciding in advance what to fail at. This notion of sort of thinking through the domains of your life and the different kind of ambitions that you have for the different domains, and making a sort of upfront decision that for the next month, 6 months, a year, there are specific ones that you're really going to decide from the beginning not to accomplish, not to achieve. Because we live in this, so we're in this situation of infinite possibilities and finite capacities. And the natural tendency is to try to sort of excel in them all, to be, depending on your life situation, but I don't know, but like sort of totally give yourself over to your work projects or your creative projects, your academic projects, your relationships, some hobby you're really into, your physical fitness, and then meet this problem that, you can't do more than 100%, and then just feel bad about yourself for sort of half-assing all these different domains of your life when you run into this truth. But this idea, which I attribute in the book to an author called John Acuff, where I first found it in his writing, this idea that, like, if you say, well, actually, you know what, the next 6 months really are going to be dedicated to this new business I'm starting, or to doing as well as I possibly can in this degree or something like that. And sure, you've got to do basic things to stay basically fit, but maybe this is the time not to be training for the 10K. Maybe this is the time, and it goes different. There's life stages, right? There's certainly times in life when looking after a newborn baby and getting away with as little as you possibly can at work might be the way you would flip that. But it's just about sort of making that decision for a period of time so that you're not even attempting several of these things, and you can really give your all to the ones that you do give.
Deciding what to fail at might seem strange because we all have an unhealthy obsession with avoiding our own personal failure. But without determining what to fail at, we can't achieve the results that we need in the projects that we really want to pursue, because we are limited to a degree, as Oliver said in the clip. We can't do everything with the finite time we have. Therefore, we need to fail at a bunch of other things. We actually need to fail at everything apart from the things that we actually focus on. So, for instance, I think it'd be great for me to spend more time on social media, making content, whether it be on TikTok or making more reels. But I think, and I believe, I've reached the point where any more content like that would hamper other areas like the podcast, or like pursuing my learning, whether it be playing the guitar more, or whether it be programming, or whether it be, for instance, learning languages, reading more books, making more podcasts. There's limited time to do all those things, and pursuing such an endeavor, even though others might be doing it, it will hamper other areas. And without acknowledging that, I would be pursuing goals that are not mine, but rather are forced by others or convention at large. I think about this a lot as well as a content creator, because there's many digital marketers out there, or people that are promoting how to grow your brand or grow your social media page, telling you should do X, you should do Y. And it's difficult sometimes because often you have to ignore that advice if you're someone that is pursuing something for the long term, because short-term strategies are short-term strategies for a reason, because they only work for the short term. So I think the best advice is don't be scared to fail ahead of time. It is often more productive and a lot easier to fail ahead of time than to fail having put in a lot of time and effort. I've been there. Our 10th and last clip comes from episode 51 with Jeff Haden, where we discussed his book, The Motivation Myth, How High Achievers Really Set Themselves Up to Win. And this was a book that I really looked forward to reading. The title is very catchy, and it was great to have Jeff on the podcast to discuss elements of the book. And I love to start a lot of things, if people haven't realised. If you follow me, you'll know that I like to do a lot of things and start many things. But like many people, I often fail to keep a consistent routine. It's something that I've got better with over time. As a 28-year-old, I've started many things in my late 20s. You know, I was thinking about it the other day. My mum and I were watching the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra that was being directed by John Williams, who's the famous director, the conductor, and someone who is very famous for making compositions for movies, namely Star Wars. And I remember because, you know, there was the orchestra there playing the violins, and I played the violin at school, and I thought to myself, imagine if I kept that up. You know, imagine if I kept it up. You know, I started when I was probably 9 or 10, and I didn't really I stopped probably when I was 13, and took up the guitar instead because, you know, girls. So but I just think about it, you know, there's many things that I've started and not continued. And in our podcast, Jeff explained that if you want to start anything, it's important to focus on it solely for 2 weeks. And I think a lot of people get too focused on the results immediately instead of focusing on a specific period of time. And it's interesting because focusing on something for 2 weeks is a good primer, as Jeff says.
So that's why I always say, if you're going to do something hard and you're going to embark on some long achievement journey, you need to follow the 2-week rule, which is I'm going to have a process, I'm going to lay it out, I know what I need to do every day, and I commit to doing that for 2 weeks. Because if you start out the first day, you're terrible. The second day, if it's fitness related, you're worse because now you're sore and you're also trying to do it. The third day is horrible. But by the second week, you're starting to see some improvement. You're starting to get fitter. You're starting to kind of bed into what the thing is. And at the end of 2 weeks, then you can take a clear-eyed look at it and say, is this something I want to continue? And you'll have a sense of, how is it working for you? Do you really like it or not? Is it something that's fulfilling and gratifying? Is that where you want to go? But it's an objective decision. Whereas on the second or third day, it's not objective. It's totally subjective, and it's because it sucks. And you want to quit. And so if you can't commit to saying, all right, I'm going to do this for 2 weeks, no matter what, I'm going to give it that go, and I will evaluate it then. If you can't commit to that, then whatever that goal is you say you want to achieve, you don't really want to achieve it. Because 2 weeks is not that long in whatever it may be, whether it's learning to play an instrument or learning a language or, you know, doing cold calls for sales. I don't care what it is. If you can't do something for 2 weeks that is proven to work for other people, and again, we're not that different. What works for you will in large part work for me. So if you tell me what to do with something and you've done it before and succeeded, I should pretty much follow that. Later on, when I gain expertise, I can adapt it a little bit to my individual circumstances. But early on, we're all kind of the same. So 2 weeks, stick with it. Then you can have a clear-eyed, objective look at, is this working for me, and is it something I really want to pursue? And if at the end of that time you say, you know what, I got better, I feel good about this, I did improve, but you know, I don't think this is right for me, it's not something I want to pursue, and there's something else I would prefer to try, that's fine.
What I liked about the clip specifically is this 2-week rule takes the idea of feeling out of the equation. You know, our mind has a funny way of convincing us not to do things in the present because we're not seeing results. However, once you replace your feelings about something with a time period for reflection down the road, you give yourself enough time to actually see results. And this is something that I've been struggling with recently is, you know, over the weekend we had a family gathering and I was speaking to one of the people there, and I was saying, you know, how I've started to actually get into the gym more and into my physical exercise. And I sort of ebbed and flowed through the years. When I was at university, I trained really hard and I got quite muscular, and then I started working and it sort of dipped a bit and then it rose again. And now I'm back at the place where I'm starting to focus on it more. But I don't know why I just wasn't consistent through the years, because I would would have seen, I might look like The Rock now. I would look like The Rock, trust me. But it's just interesting about reflecting back, and this is why I like reflection, because you can see why things happened over time and use that as data when you start things again. That's not failure in my mind. That's just data. That's just time. That's experience that you can use if you want to start something again, whether it's related to something or whether it's something completely new. And this is an idea that I've been using since reading the book and since speaking to Jeff, is start something for 2 weeks. And if you can see something and it's something that you enjoy, then you can carry it on. If it's something that you thought was great, but something that you don't want to do or pursue, or maybe there's a different avenue, then you can go down that road. But at least start it for 2 weeks and be committed to it. So those are the 10 clips, but I would be remiss if I didn't add a bonus clip at the end. It's the festive period, it's coming to the end of the year. I thought I'd add a little bonus clip in there. And during the conversation I had with Jack Murray about his book, The Magic Slice, Storytelling for Business, he discussed his own experience writing the book. That was his first book, and he discussed some ideas that he used and some principles he used in order to get it complete, or really to get any large project or endeavor complete. And the advice was so great, and I thought I'd add it to the bonus, as a bonus to this list, so you can learn from it. Here's the clip.
First of all, she said you have to make a contract with yourself every week as to how much of your time you're going to commit to this project. And she said, do a deal with yourself on a Sunday night to say, I'm going to write X amount of hours. So on a week where I would say, I'm going to write 5 hours, I'm going to write 7 hours. If I had to keep that bargain with myself, and I would always do more than what I agreed to do. So if I said I would do 7, I would do 10. If I said I would do 10, I would do 12. And I made that deal with myself where I said, this week I'm going to do 10 hours. And then I knew, okay, it has to be done. The second thing she said to do was keep a spreadsheet. So she said all high performance athletes keep a journal. And one of the reasons they keep a journal is they log when they train, how long they train for, what they get done, and how they felt. So in my spreadsheet, I had, when I wrote, how long I wrote for, what I wrote about, and how many words I wrote, and how I felt. And the interesting thing about that was the day where I cranked out really bad 400 words, I would always feel better about that than the day I was sailing at 2,000 words. And every 500 words was 1%. So I had 2 spreadsheets, one that logged my writing and then one that basically showed the progress I had on rolling the rock up the hill. And the repeated practice and basically chipping away at getting that rock up the hill really, really helped. And there was days when I felt terrible and I would send her a message saying, look, I'm kind of struggling today. And she'd say, how far are you along the way? And I'd say, well, I'm 40% on the way. Oh, another 10% and you'll be halfway. And she always said the right thing at the right time. But those different techniques, kind of sports techniques, took it from something that, was rumbling along the ground to something that actually got legs and became something that was its own thing, that then almost got a momentum of its own to kind of get over the top. And it was those writing techniques, and I would revisit them for the next book. I have an idea for my next book and I'll be revisiting those. And it was the contract with yourself and then the logging of the writing, and it was a massive help.
What I loved about this clip was this idea of making a contract with yourself and logging the process along the way. For instance, I'm currently making a contract with myself about being more physically active and training, as I said previously. And this contract is written for a set period of time. And I'm also logging every session for maintaining consistency and for future reflection and review later. And I like how professional sports athletes operate in tracking progress. It's a well documented documentation of sports athletes that they like to document their process. I said document a lot then. And I think that we can all take the professionalism of elite athletes and apply it to our own lives in positive ways. The techniques highlighted by Jack are a great starting place, and that's why I like reading things on different subjects and by different people. And hopefully you've learned a lot from the points that I've talked about today, but it's this idea that there's patterns between all of them. You know, whether you are a writer, whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're someone who is a programmer, whether you're someone who's in marketing, it doesn't really matter. There are some key principles that you can use in order to track progress over time, be consistent, and maintain your focus over a long period of time so you get the results that you want. And I really, really enjoyed that clip where he started to open up about his experience and how he used the process of making a contract with himself, whether it even be written, you know, written's always helpful, but even if it's a verbal contract, or it could even be a contract with another person. I've known people to do that as well. But more importantly is this idea of logging it down, writing it down, being accountable to yourself, which is a big thing that I've started to follow more and more as I've got older and become a bit more experienced. You know, accountability is a huge thing. So, but also using that as data, because data is really important. Like I said earlier, is over time and experience, you can use that data to help you in order to do something new, or even to help you in that project, whether you come back to it 3 or 4 years down the road. So yeah, the techniques highlighted by Jack are great, and hopefully you found those valuable. So that's it. That's the best of list of 2021. Like I said, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and also supporting the podcast for the year. I really, really appreciate it. And we have some great authors lined up already for 2022. And I really believe that 2022 is going to be a big year for the podcast. We've gained some massive momentum this year with the authors that we've had on, and we've really experienced some amazing growth around the globe with listeners everywhere. So I can't thank you enough for tuning in. If you haven't already, please do like, share, and subscribe to any channel that you watch this on, whether it be YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google. Doesn't matter. Please subscribe, like, and share. And with any friends or family who are readers, or even people that you know that don't like to read. And this could be a podcast that they can listen to in order to get great ways to get into a reading habit. And I think listening to authors is something that is great, because it is a low intensity way to get really great ideas and inspire you to read books as well. So please do share it with anyone that you know that would find some value in this. And I can't thank you enough for subscribing to the podcast and to listening to the podcast. Have a great new year, and I'll see you in the next one.